and talk about a guy who I believe does not get enough recognition as one of the greatest of all time. The face of Boston basketball, Larry Bird. His greatness does not get talked about enough. You hear all the talk about players giving their top tens, the best of all time, and you very rarely hear Larry Bird's name get mentioned, but this guy was an absolute monster, one of the greatest ever for me, and a guy that was the face of the league, saved the league along with Magic Johnson back in the 80s.
Where does he? The interesting thing about Bird is that he's a guy that does not fit the like for our generation, like our idea of what a superstar is. Um, he's not athletic, straight up. Look back, like that was not his strong suit. He was not dunking over anybody. He was not finishing over anybody. He was at times missing layups, but I think his skill level though is something that you can't really appreciate until you look back and you watch some games. You look back and you see the kind of players he's dominating, and you realize that in the '80s, second to Magic Johnson, that was like the best playmaker in the league, one of the best offensive rebounders in the league, the best shooter in the league, and like just the what he could have done, I think, in this era with the spaced out floor. I think that's a crazy thing. Like when we have to go back and talk about these players and look at '80s basketball, like it is just so congested, man. It's like
Mhm.
how I don't understand how anyone scored back then, except back to the basket. A lot of grungy offensive rebounding. That's why he had two bigs at the same time. But I think when you rank him, where do you put him in terms of like offensive players? So I see he's like top five easily.
Oh, 100%. His IQ was off the charts. That he was a genius of a player. And you think about the level of IQ he had to have as a guy who wasn't dominating athletically. And like you saw that on the court, the passes, the reads, the shooting ability that he had as well. He was next level. Like I for what he did for the league and the ability that he has. Obviously, I wasn't watching him live when he was playing, but when you look back and you watch the tape and you hear the way he's talked about, he for me he's on my Mount Rushmore. He's in my top five all time. I really believe he was one of the greatest of all time, and maybe it's forgotten about because of like the last few years were quite injury ridden. He didn't really have that longevity, but the over his 13 years in the league, like he was a monster. Everyone knew Larry Bird. Everyone feared Larry Bird, and rightfully so. I mean, you list off the things he did it all. 3-time MVP, 3-time champ, 2-time Finals MVP, only player in NBA history to average 24, 10, and 6. Created the 50-40-90 club. Career averages of 51, 38, and 88, and like two of the GOAT nicknames of all time. I mean, Larry Legend and the Hick from French Lick. Top tier nicknames right there. This guy was unbelievable.
I think we were talking about trying to think about players in today's period just for people to kind of get a sense of like put into context like how good some of these historical players were, especially because the context of basketball is different in terms of like what the strategy was, what the physicality, whether it was different or not. The athleticism was definitely different, and I think it's a weird and maybe a pedestrian comparison, but his finishing around the rim is what's insane. I mean, a 6'9" forward, but getting messy with 7-footers with the physicality in the '80s too. I mean, there's a reason why he broke down. I mean, this guy was a max hustle player, and that's something like first and foremost that I wanted to point out when watching Larry Bird. You don't always see that level of like dogged mentality, like just going after every loose ball. Like there's so many highlights of him diving after a loose ball and getting an assist right after, like be on the ground, getting an assist, getting thrown down because he's getting into position for offensive rebounds. And like that level of hustle for your best player, that is so impressive. You don't see that with like 90% of stars out there. They just don't do that sort of thing, saving their body. Um, but I think when you look at how he finished around the rim, it's fascinating to kind of compare him to Jokic a little bit, just in terms of like his post play and his footwork is was so like so perfect. And it's like he always knew the counter. He always knew, and that came from one thing that was very special about watching the tape is how quickly you get a shot off. As soon as that ball is in his hands, he could just rise up and shoot. Immediately rise up and shoot. Almost like I think we were talking about comparing them to different players, right? Like Klay Thompson, the way that the ball hits Klay Thompson's hands and he's already in shooting motion, it was like the same thing. You would see Larry Bird be in the post, and as soon as the ball is his way, his feet are already turning, getting his shoulder squared, and he's shooting right over that guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then he would turn that almost like Jokic would know, someone's coming right from his left side. As soon as he gets the ball, he's spinning right. And like drop step right. Immediately knows. And like the quick moves, just that IQ that he had to counter everything, that started from him being a really, really adept shooter. Just the second the ball touched his hand was amazing. And then those Jokic like floaters around the rim, those very like that's when we compare athleticism, right? Like if you just watch highlights of Larry Bird like shooting little floaters over guys within 4 feet, that's not like, oh my God, that's a top 10 player ever. Like look at him dominating everybody, but he would do that all game.
Mm-hmm.
He wouldn't, and he would never get tired of that. He would do that to everybody. And he was smart enough to counter everything that other teams had for him. And it's almost like when I think 10, 15 years from now, if people look back and just watch a clip of Jokic, unless it's passes, like they'll be like, why was this guy back-to-back MVP?
Mm-hmm.
What are we seeing here? But it's that consistent knowing how to play chess, knowing how to like out IQ everybody on the floor, not just with the shooting, but the passing too. That really opened my eyes to watch that consistently and think about the players in the league today and like the combination of shooting and playmaking and rebounding and all that. He was just an amazing all-around player.
Oh yeah, for sure. And like you think about it, like think of like his like greatest qualities probably his IQ, his scoring and shooting ability, and then kind of like the grit and determination side as well. Like you think like he was a match for LeBron James in terms of level of IQ.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Like 100%. And like that, like LeBron's the guy that everyone always talks about, like his IQ is off the charts. Larry Bird was the exact same way. And then in terms of like the scoring, the 3 level scoring for like a big guy, like he's like he'd be doing what like Kevin Durant does now. I fully believe if he was playing in the league today and it was more the way Boston played back in the day, if they like allowed him to be in position to shoot more 3 pointers and things like that, I fully believe he would have been doing similar things to what Kevin Durant does as a 3 level scorer. And then you think like the obviously like the arrogance he had, the trash talking, everything, like the amount of guys, the stories you hear, like he literally would tell you, this is exactly what I'm gonna do, but you won't be able to stop it. and he just goes and do it. No problem. Like, and the story with like playing the game left-handed because he was saving his right hand for the Lakers, and what did he scored like nearly 50 points and like half of them with his left hand. Like this guy had unbelievable confidence, unbelievable arrogance, and just all around just great ability. He was in a different class to a lot of people, and it needs to be talked about more. People need to listen to this now. Go back and watch some Larry Bird highlights, and you will realize what a talented player this guy was.
Do you think it's crazy to think about like if you were to try to explain to someone who watched today and not know or have seen anything about Larry Bird, I feel like watching the kind of passes he makes, I maybe again I said this is low hanging fruit, but Luka Doncic, the way Luka like predicts passing lanes, predicts the the third action.
You only
off of
gonna
a
compare
play.
him to white guys?
No, I know. And when I was thinking about it, I was like, this is not what I'm trying to do. But like, but the way that Luka sees the floor from his height, and the way that Jokic does with his height too. I think that's a big difference because Larry Bird as a post playmaker with his height could do so much more than a regular point guard could.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you just compare those two guys and just imagined if Luka was a 2-time all defensive player, and if Luka was a top 5 like offensive rebounder for his position, like great rebounder, but offensive rebounder, like you saw Larry Bird like getting down and dirty in the paint with 7-footers in the 80s. Like that's that kind of energy that he had. And I think that should put into perspective for anyone who watches mostly modern NBA and doesn't know that, including myself. Honestly, that's another echelon of player. Because we put Luka on a big pedestal because he's like, oh, that's easily top five player in our league of our generation, top five player of our generation. But like he's missing so many attributes that Larry Legend had. And for two guys that are wing playmakers, not because they're whites, but they're wing playmakers, he's just miles ahead. And I think that just goes to show for me too that for a guy I'm a huge fan of, Luka has a long way to go to become a legendary all-time player. And just because he came in as Luka Legend, he did not earn the right to be called Luka Legend because there is only one legend. It's Larry Legend, and he hasn't earned that yet. Defensively, on the boards, what he did in the finals, what he did in the playoffs. Obviously, I will say, Kevin McHale was the best scorers of his generation, and he was arguably top two, top three scorers in certain years in the 80s. So I mean, Larry had help, and he had a great defense around him too. Like that team was very good, very good. So if the Mavs got to get something together to compare the two, but I mean, same thing. Jokic has a team around him that's perfect, and look how well he's done. So, but just to add perspective to it, I think it's when you try to make those comparisons, it's really hard to because there are very few complete players, and then you have to just look over to the easy one, LeBron. LeBron's a complete player. Larry was a complete player.
Yeah, that's definitely the big thing, and that's why like I only kind of got into watching when I'm watching some like 30 for 30s and old documentaries, and I kind of see the way he plays. And even like, I remember my parents, I talk about it, they weren't even that big into basketball, but like you knew about Larry Bird, you knew that the Lakers were playing the Celtics. You always knew that when you were living in America in the 80s, when that was happening, and that was just such a huge thing. And he's not given enough credit because he's not a guy that's freaking always having to talk. He's happy in his retirement. And also another credit to him, he's a guy that could do it all. Only guy in ever to win MVP, Coach of the Year, and Executive of the Year.
Yeah,
Like
true.
he's obviously a very intelligent man, so he's been able to do it all. Obviously, never won the chip as a coach, but he led that Indiana team and really pushed the Michael Jordan Bulls to the edge. So this is an all around NBA man. He knows what's up, and one of the greatest of all time. And I'm glad we got to talk on him because he's someone I don't think that gets enough recognition in these modern times.
Absolutely.